Happy Friday. Uh, Thank you for all of the notes and emails and little messages I received of support and healing wishes from you all. As most of you know, I had came down with COVID last week. Um, Feeling much better. I know my throat sounds. I still have some light congestion. I feel fine, but I think my voice sounds sicker than I feel right now. So, according to the CDC's calculator, my COVID is over. And it was like having a pretty bad cold with fever, maybe more like a flu, with fever and chills. But yeah, I'm grateful it wasn't worse than it was. My husband all caught COVID from me, so he is 4 days behind my timeline. So he's not quite done with it yet, but has milder symptoms than I had, and I think we'll be fine soon. So I sort of assumed that many of you would feel heartened to see me and hear from me, and then that's the main point of this message. I have some ramblings about COVID if you want to hear more detail. Having had it now, I'm super interested in COVID, and well, I guess I've been interested all along, but now I get to have some firsthand experience myself. I think that there is, I think I first mentioned 2 or even 3 weeks ago that the wastewater numbers show that we're in a surge, and I actually think that we're going to surge in San Diego County, but I think we're probably in a huge surge nationwide that's mostly kind of invisible because many of us just get sick and treat it at home and go back to our lives. But I was on a social media group for people who were positive with COVID, and there were so many of us who were having it for the first time, didn't know where we got it, and so I think there's a lot of us who are getting it that way, and who aren't sure how we had it. So people who managed to make it over 2 years are finally getting hit with it. I assume that I had Omicron. I didn't have a test to tell me that, but Omicron is the dominant variant in San Diego right now, one of 2 variants of Omicron 2. And yeah, I'm still a little foggy. The one thing that's informative is that I had not had my second booster yet. I was waiting. I was actually going to get it last week to get ready for going to Portland for General Assembly. So that might have been sort of the biggest vulnerability. But like I said, I don't know how I got it. So I must have gotten it wearing a mask or being outside without a mask. So doing things that I thought were careful and things that I've done hundreds of times. So, we were reading this back in January, but it's really hit me that Omicron is as contagious as measles. So another possibility is that I might have been in a space that someone else had vacated, and that we sort of got infected that way. So yeah, I'm just really aware of how contagious it must be for me to get it. The other thing to be aware of, and again, so there's so many variants of Omicron now, and there are so many variants of COVID, and so we continue to not know enough or as much as we would like to. So my timeline was Memorial Day weekend. I tested negative Saturday before the memorial service. I tested negative on Sunday before worship. Sunday night, I had kind of I wouldn't even say a sore throat, but it was like a scratchy throat. And I told my husband, I think I must have just done a lot of talking this weekend. That's what it felt like a little bit sore. And then the next morning, I was not feeling well. Was my aches all over, and my test was negative. And began to have a fever. My fever went up to 103. I had chills. I had heavy blankets on me. And it didn't occur to me to test again on Monday. I thought that my negative test meant that I wasn't contagious. My husband thought the negative test meant that I just had a cold, not COVID, and we did not isolate me. And that was a mistake. So that's one thing I want to lift up, that this variant, you could have negative tests, and that doesn't necessarily tell you that you don't have it yet. So be aware of that. I know the tests are really useful to us. And so I've Googled this now. And so doctors aren't clear. They know that this variant has symptoms developing before you have a positive test. And so they don't know if that means you aren't contagious when you get that negative test, or if for some reason the test isn't picking up now that we've been vaccinated, and there's so many different variants that maybe there's something in the test that isn't reading it right. So I assumed that, I assumed that it meant we weren't contagious because, to the best of my knowledge, people I saw on Saturday and Sunday did not get COVID from me. So at least through the weekend, those tests seemed to be accurate. I didn't, again, tell me if you got COVID that weekend, but we haven't heard that from anybody. So, and so I realized once I felt better that we never had a plan for having COVID. Our plan was always to not get COVID, and the mistake of not having a plan is that once I wasn't feeling well, we were not thinking clearly. So that's something I want to lift up. If you're like me and never thought about it very much, I think I just assumed that, like, well, if we get it, we'll figure it out then. But we did not make good decisions Monday when I had symptoms and a negative test. So our new plan would be, if either one of us isn't feeling well, we would isolate then, no matter what the test says. Because Peter didn't have to catch COVID. He caught COVID from me because we didn't react promptly to my symptoms. So take symptoms very seriously, even if it feels like so many people are saying, like, I just thought it was allergies. It was just a scratchy throat. Take that very seriously for a couple of days if you can, and just know that there's a variant that the test comes up negative first. So yes, we would isolate a sick person quickly. Now, if we had it to do over, we would consider that maybe the healthy person needs to go to a hotel. We didn't really think about that at all, and that might have been the safest thing to do. I was never so sick that I couldn't have taken care of myself if I needed to, and he could have, he did go to the grocery store and get those kinds of things. So you have to make that decision of, how much caregiving. And, many of us are very fortunate to have, homes where we can isolate someone in one room. It is very lonely and boring to be isolated in your room, even with your iPad. And I know many of you have experienced that. So now I get it, how much you miss just being with the other person. Also part of our plan, because COVID's going to be with us for a while, neither one of us thought very seriously about talking to our doctors about medication. And I might do that if I got it again. There's two, you're probably familiar with monoclonal antibodies. Those are, and many of you are in higher risk categories, and certainly anyone 60 or older should consider yourself to be in a risk category. But there's also this oral medication called Paxlovid, which is very effective from what I hear. People take it and their COVID clears up. There's some side effects to be aware of, including in some very rare cases that your symptoms you might clear up for a week, but then your symptoms might come back. But all of those are things to talk about with your doctor. So, and it's significant to take those medications early in your symptoms. So, so again, our plan, our early plan would be to isolate because of symptoms, to consider if someone should go to a hotel, contact our doctor sooner to let them know about illness. Yeah. So if we had been more aggressive on Monday, Peter might not have gotten COVID. So that's our regret. And having had COVID, even though it's for us, it's been a bad cold, but it's also long. I'm on my 12th day since my symptoms started. Peter's on his 8th day. The CDC, now I already remember what I said. The CDC considers me done. They have a calculator. Peter won't be done for a couple of more days. Uh, the other thing I'm learning is that it's tricky to figure out when you're done with COVID. This is why the CDC has a calculator instead of just like a list of instructions, because it depends on, well, when did you stop having a fever, and are your symptoms getting better, or are they still pretty pronounced? But in general, the CDC guidelines are to isolate for 5 days, then wear a mask, don't travel, and then after 10 days, uh, assuming you're feeling pretty good, you can sort of get back to life. And that timeline has matched how I feel. Like I said, I'm on day 12. I feel fine. I've been working all week and being in meetings and those kinds of things. So the last tip I want to give you is way back at the start of the pandemic, when we were sort of panicking about stuff. My husband bought a humidifier for our bedroom. He read about that somewhere, and we've just had that and been using it. And I think it has accidentally turned out to really be a wonderful item to have. I could be misunderstanding the situation, but many people with this version of COVID have a terrible, terrible sore throat. They describe it like swallowing glass, that it keeps them awake at night because the pain is so severe. And we have not had that. And I think having the humidifier has helped. So even as we're breathing at night with our mouths open and coughing, I have a cough, the throat hasn't been sore. And so I feel really grateful for that. And yeah, it is very dry here where we live, and it doesn't hurt to have a humidifier for a variety of reasons. So you might, if you don't have one, you might consider having one. Yeah, I just feel like it wasn't a happy accident. He bought it on purpose, but we didn't know that we would get COVID and it would turn out to be really handy. So, was there anything else I wanted to tell you? I think that's it. I wish I could feel like having COVID would make me feel bolder, or like, well, now that I've had it, I know that I won't get it for a while, but there's actually so many variants that just because I've had it doesn't mean I couldn't get sick with a different variant in a few weeks. Um, so that's kind of rough looking ahead. Uh, I've messaged my doctor asking about the booster, like, should I get the booster now because I am going to be traveling and I didn't get the booster and I got COVID, so I want the protection? Or do we assume that having had Omicron gives you a few months of, at least I'm protected from Omicron, but there's other things out there. So let me just mention that CDC calculator again. It's good to know about that. As so many of us are, I've had multiple emails this week from other people with COVID, and so you might imagine that you're done with COVID when you tested negative for COVID, but it turns out you can test positive once you've had it. You can test positive for quite a while before it doesn't mean you're contagious anymore, because your most contagious time is earlier in your having it. So it's good. So you wish it was an easier guideline, but filling out the calculator online is very simple, and then it tells you very straightforward, here's what wear a mask, and refrain from travel through this date. And then, it's nice to just be told that, even though you might wish it was easier. So, yeah, I'm afraid this is going to continue to be with us for a long time. And having had it makes me feel a little more reticent about travel. We had traveled to New Mexico earlier this year, and I didn't get sick and had masks, and so I was really feeling like the masks are working, and I can resume normal life with, good mask protection. And so this has shaken that thought a little bit of like, oh, I wasn't doing anything I considered risky, and I got COVID somehow. So yeah, on the one hand, I've had COVID, it was fine, I feel fine. And on the other hand, boy, it's really contagious. Like, yeah. So anyway, I'll look forward to being with you online and in person on Sunday. I hope you all are doing well. If you have COVID, shoot me an email. I can commiserate with you. And blessings and love to each of us. Please take care.